After a long day of dealing with the usual stresses, I felt like I needed to clear my head. Just me, my car, and the open road. The clock on my dashboard read 11:47 p.m. when I pulled out of my driveway. The world outside bathed in a mix of pale moonlight and the occasional orange glow of streetlights. I didn't have a specific destination in mind. The plan was to just drive around aimlessly for an hour or two and let the night air work its magic. The roads were mostly empty, which made everything feel a bit surreal. There's something strangely calming about an empty highway at night. The hum of the engine, the rhythm of the tires against the asphalt, the distant lights of houses flickering in the distance. It was exactly what I needed. About 30 minutes into the drive, I veered off the main highway onto a smaller, more secluded road. It was one of those roads you'd only find if you were looking for it, surrounded by dense woods on both sides. The canopy of trees blocked out most of the moonlight, leaving only my headlights to illuminate the way. Felt both peaceful and a little eerie, but I shrugged it off. It was just a drive after all. The first sign that something was off came about 10 minutes later. As I rounded a bend, my headlights caught a glimpse of something on the side of the road. It was a car, parked at an odd angle with its hazard lights flashing. Instinctively, I slowed down, debating whether or not to stop. My better judgment told me to keep driving, but curiosity got the better of me. I pulled over a few feet ahead and got out of my car. The air was cold, and the forest was eerily silent except for the faint hum of my engine and the rhythmic blinking of the hazard lights. As I approached the car, I noticed that the driver's side door was slightly ajar. "Hello," I called out, my voice sounding unusually loud in the stillness. No response. I hesitated, glancing back at my own car. Something about the whole situation felt wrong, but I couldn't just leave without at least checking if someone needed help. I took a few cautious steps closer and peered inside the car. The interior was empty. No driver, no passengers, nothing. The keys were still in the ignition, and a faint smell of burnt rubber lingered in the air, like the car had been forced to stop suddenly. My heart started to race. It wasn't fear exactly, but a creeping sense of unease. Who leaves their car like this in the middle of nowhere? I decided to head back to my car and call the police. As I turned around, that's when I saw him. A man was standing on the edge of the road, partially obscured by the shadows of the trees. He was tall, wearing dark clothes, and his face was difficult to make out in the dim light. I froze, my mind racing to process the sudden appearance. Hey," I stammered, trying to sound casual but failing miserably. "Is this your car?" He didn't respond. Instead, he took a slow step forward, his movements deliberate and unnervingly calm. My instincts screamed at me to get back in my car and leave, but my legs felt like they were made of lead. I thought someone might need help," I said, taking a cautious step backward. Still no response. Another step forward from him. That's when I noticed the object in his hand. It was hard to make out in the darkness, but it looked sharp. A knife? Or maybe a tool? Whatever it was, the intent behind it was clear. I didn't wait to find out what he wanted. Adrenaline surged through me, and I bolted for my car. I could hear him running behind me, his footsteps pounding against the pavement. My hands fumbled with the door handle, but I managed to throw it open and dive inside. Just as I slammed the door shut, I saw his face up close for the first time through the window. It was twisted into a grotesque grin, his eyes wild with a mix of rage and something else I couldn't quite place. Exhilaration, maybe. He banged on the window with the object in his hand, and I realized with a sickening jolt that it was a crowbar. I didn't waste another second. My shaking hands found the ignition, and I floored the gas pedal. The tires screeched as the car lurched forward, and I sped down the road as fast as I could. In the rearview mirror, I saw him standing in the middle of the road, watching me. Even as I put distance between us, I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still there, watching. For a while, I drove aimlessly, too scared to stop or even slow down. My mind raced with questions. Who was he? What did he want? And where had he come from? The answers didn't matter as much as the fact that I needed to get as far away from him as possible. Eventually, I found my way back to the main highway. The familiarity of the streetlights and the occasional passing car was a welcome relief. I pulled into the first gas station I came across and parked under the bright lights, my hands still trembling as I reached for my phone. I called the police and told them everything. They assured me they'd send someone to check out the area and advised me to stay put until an officer arrived. About 20 minutes later, a patrol car pulled up, and I recounted the entire story to the officer. He listened carefully, his expression grave. "You did the right thing by getting out of there," he said. "We've had reports of similar incidents in this area recently. Sounds like you ran into the guy we've been looking for." My blood ran cold. "What do you mean, similar incidents?" The officer hesitated before answering. "There have been a few cases of stranded cars being used as bait. People stop to help, and, well, let's just say they don't always make it out unscathed. We're doing everything we can to catch him." They took my statement and assured me they'd keep me updated. A week later, I got a call from the police. They'd caught the guy. Apparently, he'd been using stolen cars to lure people in and had a history of violent offenses. I felt a strange mix of relief and lingering fear. Knowing he was behind bars was comforting, but the memory of that night still haunted me. I haven't taken a night drive since, and honestly, I don't think I ever will again. I'm not the type to scare easily, but I'll admit that night shook me to my core. I had just finished a late shift at work. Exhausted, yes, but too wired to head straight home. So, I decided to do something I hadn't done in a while. Take a long drive. It's one of those things that feels oddly therapeutic. Just you and the road, no destination in mind. The clock in my car read 12:18 a.m. when I started driving. The city streets were mostly empty, and the glowing streetlights gave the world a hazy, dreamlike quality. It was the perfect recipe for unwinding. I headed out of the city limits, where the roads stretched endlessly, flanked by empty fields and the occasional patch of forest. It felt liberating, at least at first. About 20 minutes in, I came across an unmarked dirt road veering off to the right. It looked inviting in a strange way, as though it held secrets just waiting to be uncovered. Against my better judgment, I turned onto it. My headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating tall trees on either side. The road was uneven, but I kept going, curiosity outweighing caution. That's when I saw it. A car parked haphazardly on the shoulder, its headlights off, but its interior light on. The light cast a dim glow, enough to reveal that the driver's door was wide open. I slowed down, my hands gripping the wheel tighter. Something about the scene felt off. My first instinct was to keep driving, but I couldn't shake the nagging thought that someone might need help. I pulled over a few feet ahead, leaving my engine running. As I stepped out of my car, the cold night air hit me, making me shiver. The forest around me was deathly quiet, the kind of silence that presses against your ears and makes your own breathing seem too loud. I walked cautiously toward the abandoned car. "Hello," I called out, my voice echoing faintly in the stillness. No response. The car was empty, but the engine was still warm to the touch. I glanced into the back seat, half expecting to see someone slumped over, but there was nothing. Just an empty coffee cup and a crumpled map on the passenger seat. My gut told me to leave. Whatever was going on here, it wasn't my problem. But as I turned to head back to my car, I heard it, the faint crunch of leaves behind me. I froze, my heart hammering in my chest. Slowly, I turned around. A man stood a few feet away, partially hidden by the shadows of the trees. He was tall, his face obscured by a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. His clothes were plain, unremarkable, a dark jacket and jeans. But what made my blood run cold was the way he was holding something behind his back. I couldn't see what it was, but his posture screamed tension. Hi," I said, trying to sound casual despite the panic rising in my throat. "Is this your car?" He didn't answer. Instead, he tilted his head slightly, as if studying me. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. I took a cautious step back, my pulse racing. "I was just checking to see if anyone needed help," I added quickly, hoping to defuse whatever this was. That's when he stepped forward, and I caught a glimpse of what he was holding. a wrench, a big, heavy one. His grip on it was tight, his knuckles white in the dim light. I didn't wait for him to make the first move. I bolted toward my car, adrenaline propelling me forward. I could hear him behind me, his footsteps fast and deliberate. My hands fumbled with the door handle, but I managed to throw it open and dive inside. As I slammed the door shut, he reached my car, his face inches from the glass. For a split second, our eyes met. His expression was eerily calm, almost bored, but his eyes were wild, glinting with something I couldn't quite place. He raised the wrench and slammed it against my window. The glass held, but the sound was deafening. I didn't stick around to see if the window would hold a second time. My hands found the ignition and I floored the gas pedal. The tires spun for a moment before catching, and the car shot forward. In my rearview mirror, I saw him standing in the middle of the road, watching me disappear into the night. I didn't stop driving until I reached a gas station several miles away. Under the harsh fluorescent lights, I finally allowed myself to breathe. My hands were shaking as I dialed the police, my voice trembling as I recounted what had happened. The dispatcher assured me they'd send someone to check it out and asked me to stay put until an officer arrived. About 15 minutes later, a patrol car pulled into the gas station. The officer listened intently as I repeated my story, his expression growing more serious with each detail. "You're lucky you got out of there," he said once I was finished. "We've been tracking reports of someone matching that description. He's been targeting people on isolated roads, using abandoned cars as bait." My stomach churned. "Has he hurt anyone?" The officer hesitated before answering. "There's been a few incidents. We're doing everything we can to catch him." They took my statement and promised to keep me updated. A few days later, I got a call from the police. They'd found the car I described, but the man was long gone. Inside the car, they discovered duct tape, rope, and other tools, the kind you don't carry around for innocent reasons. They assured me they were closing in on him, but the thought of him still out there kept me up at night. I've avoided back roads ever since, and I've made a promise to myself: no more late-night drives. Some roads are better left unexplored. I'm not sure why I decided to take the scenic route home that night. It was one of those impulsive decisions that seemed harmless at the time. Work had been draining, and I thought a quiet drive through the countryside might help clear my mind. Little did I know, it would become a night I'd never forget, and not in a good way. The clock read 10:43 p.m. when I turned off the main highway onto an unmarked dirt road. I'd driven this route a couple of times during the day, and it was always peaceful, with rolling hills and dense woods on either side. But at night, it felt entirely different. The trees seemed taller, their branches intertwining above me to create an almost tunnel-like effect. The only sound was the hum of my car engine and the occasional crunch of gravel under the tires. About 15 minutes in, I noticed something up ahead. A faint light flickered in the distance, like a dying flashlight or a firefly stuck on repeat. As I got closer, the source of the light became clear. A car parked on the side of the road with its hazard lights blinking. The car's position was odd, angled partially into the ditch, as if the driver had lost control. I slowed down instinctively, my headlights washing over the vehicle. It was an older model sedan, its dark paint scuffed and dull. The driver's door was slightly ajar, and the interior light glowed faintly, casting eerie shadows inside. My first thought was that someone might be hurt, but something about the scene made me hesitate. The night felt unnaturally quiet, the kind of silence that presses against your eardrums and makes your own breathing seem deafening. I stopped my car a few feet ahead and turned on my hazard lights. Grabbing my phone, I debated calling for help right away, but then I thought, what if someone was just waiting for assistance? Leaving without checking felt wrong. Against my better judgment, I got out of my car, leaving the engine running. The night air was cold and still. My footsteps crunched loudly on the gravel as I approached the car. "Hello," I called out, my voice sounding strangely hollow in the open space. No answer. I peered inside. The interior was a mess, with papers scattered across the seats and an empty coffee cup lying on the floor. There was no sign of the driver. I glanced around, shining my phone's flashlight into the surrounding woods. The beam of light cut through the darkness, but all it revealed were gnarled tree trunks and the occasional glint of dew on leaves. Something wasn't right. My instincts screamed at me to get back in my car and leave, but curiosity got the better of me. I decided to take a closer look at the sedan. Maybe there was a note or some clue about what had happened. As I rounded the car, I noticed something odd. The ground near the rear tires was disturbed, as if someone had been digging or dragging something. A shallow groove led from the back of the car into the woods, disappearing into the shadows. My stomach twisted. Suddenly, the silence felt oppressive, like the forest itself was holding its breath. I backed away, my flashlight trembling slightly in my hand. The thought of calling the police crossed my mind again, but before I could act, a sound shattered the stillness. The distant snap of a twig. My heart leapt into my throat. The sound had come from the woods, just beyond the reach of my flashlight. I turned toward my car, ready to bolt, but as I took a step forward, something caught my eye. A faint reflection, like metal glinting in the moonlight, was visible deep in the forest. My brain screamed at me to run, but my legs felt rooted to the spot. The glint disappeared as quickly as it had appeared, swallowed by the shadows. That was it. I didn't need any more convincing. I sprinted back to my car, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it might burst. I barely registered slamming the door shut and throwing the car into gear. As I sped down the dirt road, I kept glancing in my rearview mirror, half expecting to see something. But the road behind me was empty. I didn't stop driving until I reached the nearest gas station, a good 10 miles away. Under the bright fluorescent lights, the events of the last 30 minutes felt surreal, like a bad dream. But the dirt on my shoes and the trembling in my hands told me it had been all too real. I called the police and reported the abandoned car. The dispatcher's tone grew serious when I described its location. "We'll send someone out right away," she said. "Please stay on the line." About 20 minutes later, an officer arrived at the gas station to take my statement. He listened carefully, asking me to repeat certain details. When I mentioned the disturbed ground and the groove leading into the woods, his expression darkened. "We've had reports of strange activity in that area recently," he said, his voice low. "People finding abandoned vehicles, hearing noises, seeing things. You were smart to leave when you did." A few days later, I got a follow-up call. The officer told me they'd found the car and investigated the area. What they discovered sent chills down my spine. The groove I'd seen led to a shallow pit filled with discarded items. Clothes, personal belongings, even an old wallet. But no sign of the driver or anyone else. The case was still open with no clear answers. I've thought about that night a lot since then. I wonder who left the car there, what they were doing, and why they disappeared. But more than anything, I'm haunted by that faint glint in the woods. The one that made me run. I'll never know what it was, and maybe that's for the best. Needless to say, I'll be sticking to well-lit highways from now on. Some mysteries are better left unsolved. Hey everyone, I hope you're enjoying the content. As a college student, I work hard to create these videos, and I edit everything on my mobile phone. I'm hoping to upgrade to a laptop to improve the quality of my videos, but I don't want to ask for money directly. This Christmas, if you enjoy what I do, I'd be incredibly grateful if you could consider subscribing to the channel. It would mean the world to me. Your support helps me so much as I continue working toward my goals. Wishing you all a very Merry Christmas. May this festive season bring you joy and warmth. Thanks again for your support, and stay tuned for more.